Looks like we have reestablished connection. Always an important thing to be connected. I'll give Dragine a minute, and then she can proceed with an update on our strategic plan.
Well, hello. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to go ahead and get into my update here. So I'm really excited to discuss the Commission's strategic priorities and the progress we've made in various areas over the last quarter. These priorities are the compass guiding our efforts to better serve our schools. So we'll start by digging into priority one. This year, an achievement for our team has been improvements related to New Start appeals. Our team put in quite a bit of effort to establish a streamlined and transparent process that was communicated with all stakeholders involved. Looking ahead, we hope to calculate the cost per appeal and quantify the resources required to run an appeal cycle. Our hope is that this will help us provide us with greater clarity about the operational requirements for efficiently running the New Start appeals process. We have faced some challenges, though, particularly in dealing with the design of the application and rubric. The application in certain sections lacks room for nuance and flexibility, and this is feedback that the team is sharing with the TDOE, and you hear more about that today. Another challenge we've encountered is the delay in receiving accountability data, which has impacted the Commission's application process for the Achievement School District, the renewal process, and general feedback for our schools. We need this data to make informed decisions, and the team has had to be really flexible and thoughtful about adjustments due to this delay. We've celebrated a major success by expanding our team and scaling our operations. This has allowed us to better manage our workload and serve schools more effectively. Our team will continue to have conversations about scaling our work over the year, in addition to our dedicated scaling conversations during the summer. While we've made great strides, we've also faced some challenges with the TM Pulse rollout. We are seeking contract support to help navigate this, and the team continues to work through these issues. We've also noticed that our schools that were previously in the ASD have needed some additional support, and our team has made this a priority. We recognize the challenges and are committed to providing support. During the New Start appeals process, we communicated regularly with schools and districts and applicants to ensure a seamless process. The team hosted webinars and trainings to explain the appeals process and were available for questions along the way. These efforts are instrumental in building stronger relationships and creating an environment that benefits all parties involved in the appeal process. We also wanted to highlight the changes we made to increase community involvement. We made adjustments to our public comment for the public hearings to increase the amount of comments received. In addition, we hosted a panel at our July Commission meeting that provided an opportunity to hear from charter leaders and students in Memphis. We're currently thinking through additional opportunities and other panels to continue to reinforce open lines of communication and collaboration. We were successful with the Commission policy audit. Shout out to the team for that. It was a big lift. And that's a critical step for us towards ensuring compliance with our schools. We're also looking and trying to focus on sound financial planning and contingencies as we continue to engage in conversations about the authorizer fee. Finally, moving forward, we continue to focus on these priorities, and we'll let you know about any challenges and our successes along the way. Now I'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments from commissioners.
Any questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much, Dragine, and we appreciate your help with these particularly important items as we move forward to better serve our schools and the applicants in this charter appeal process. Commissioner Smith.
And nothing major, but I just want to go back to number one, just thinking through a year from now. I think because I saw several comments from some of the people as they were emailing in about the time. They didn't know when this committee would be meeting during the middle of the day. If we could go ahead and get those times out earlier, just so that people from around the state, if they do want to travel, know when we're meeting, because some of them not knowing the process, and I get it, they don't know how all this works, just making sure they know the time that we're going to be meeting for the appeals and stuff way in advance, just so that they can come if they want to, if they need to take some time off of work.
Absolutely. And I want to shout out Director Figueroa for that. She really works to schedule all of our public hearings, and so we'll make sure to get that on the website as soon as we can.
Any other comments or concerns? All right. Our last non-charter school appeal item on our agenda will be the update from our Executive Director, Tess Stovall. Will you please provide your updates, Tess?
Thank you, Chair Richards. Just a couple of additional updates from me. As Director Harrell shared, we are officially fully staffed, which is really exciting from where we've been almost 3 years ago to where we are right now. But I also think that's reflective of the growth in our portfolio in our school district. We now have 13 schools under our portfolio, and thousands of students who count on us. And so we recognize that as we continue to grow in terms of student population and schools, we're really going to have to continue to look at capacity needs, both from an FTE perspective, but also contracted needs as well, to make sure that we're delivering on those services that our schools expect and require to be a school district. Secondly, I did want to note that we do have a special called meeting that would be virtual that's currently being held and scheduled for December the 4th. That would to handle the 2 amendment petitions that we have received. Across the state, operators are allowed to petition their authorizer if they'd like to amend their charter agreement. Those petitions were received by October the 1st. So staff, beginning next week, is going to review those petitions, and we will be in touch if we need that December the 4th meeting, or if we will be handling any business at our regularly scheduled January 2024 meeting. So more information to come on that front. And then finally, as Drejan shared, we are statutorily responsible for accepting ASD applications from operators that meet priority exit status on the state's accountability system. Typically, that timeline runs between October 15th and our January 2024 meeting. The delay of accountability data and the delay of releasing that data is impacting this timeline. So we do anticipate having the list of schools that may qualify for that pathway by the middle of November. We have already communicated to operators who might qualify for that pathway about what the updated timeline should be. We do anticipate, if any applications come our way, that we would be considering those at our January 2024 meeting. But typically at this time of year, I would be able to share with you all the number of schools that have qualified for that pathway. But we don't have that number yet, and neither does the Department of Education. And so we are waiting on the accountability data and statuses to be determined. The State Board of Education is meeting tomorrow to work through some of that accountability data. So we should have more information in the coming weeks. And I will provide further updates to the Commission as I have it. And if we do receive applications from any ASD operators around middle of November, I will let you all know as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I just have one question. Is that going to allow us enough time to complete the review process? Because we've got to do the hearing, we want got to do capacity interviews, they've got to fill out their application. That seems awfully condensed.
Thank you for that question. So we typically run an application review process between November 15th and the end of January. Right now, we are sketching that out to be run between November 30th and the end of January. If we're really, from the Department of Education's perspective, we have heard that they should have the accountability status to operators in November such that they could turn in an application to us and we could complete our review. If we get to a point where we are starting to compromise on our process, we will have to look at, do we otherwise evaluate, and potentially there's a special called meeting that needs to be called after the January meeting to both fulfill our charge, but also to allow the operators the time to respond to our needs, hold public hearings, as you said, hold capacity interviews. And the one thing too, just to add that I have flagged for the Department of Education is that, once we get through this accountability cycle, we do need to know if this is going to be the cycle of timeline moving forward. So that if that's true, then we need to review our ASD pathway timeline to determine if we need to make any edits.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Commissioner Smith?
Well, and to follow up on that, and then I've got one other thing. I'm just going, if the DOE has not released that, I'm going to say by the 10th of November, I think we need to just take the pressure off of everybody because of just the sheer number and say, if they've not released it by the 10th of November, we need to plan for a special meeting just so we're not trying to cram it all in, because that's a burden on the staff, the schools, the school districts, the applicants. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to do in and around a Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday cycle, that I want to make sure we're doing the due diligence. So that's going to be my recommendation, is just that we already know that if it's not done, we're just going to do a special called meeting rather than trying to squeeze it in. But then I also wanted to just say thank you. I kind of look at this as the end of our year, because all this process is culminating in these reviews. And just for the general public, what you might not know is just what all our staff has gone through just this cycle. Earlier this year, one of our team members suddenly passed away. That was hard on our staff. We were able to recognize his family at our meeting in July. Just the sheer amount of work that goes into this. If you could see the amount of trees we saved by having SharePoint, literally, we would probably have to take every tree down around the Capitol just to print what's in there. But I just want to say thank you to all, and then bringing on the new staff. Hayden's joined us this year. We've got a few new team members that I see out there. So just the yeoman's work you all have done. I just wanted to kind of capstone that by just saying thank you to you and to your team, for the work that you all have done in and around some very difficult things this past year.
Other comments? Okay, we're going to take a really short 5-minute recess. We've had kind of a break, and before we start the New Start appeals, just to let everybody get up and stretch, but we will be back to start at 1:53.
I do think we well, you know as well. Guys in there. college.
All right, I have 153, so we're going to resume. The commission will consider 2 appeals this afternoon, with the remaining 6 appeals to be heard tomorrow. Before we begin these appeals, I want to recognize Tess Stovall, Ashley Thomas, and Beth Figueroa to provide an overview of the appeals process. I ask that this be done. It's for our commissioners, and we have some new commissioners, just to review some of the standards and the applicable requirements. And it might be helpful for this audience to hear it as well. So we're all going to listen to this, and I recognize Tess, Ashley, and Beth to present in whatever order you would like.
Great. Thank you, Chair Richards. So over the last few commission meetings, we've been talking a lot about the New Start appeals process and preparation, but we're here now. It's October, and it's time now to for you all to consider the 8 New Start appeals that we have, and you'll be deliberating on those over the course of today and tomorrow. And so before we dive into each specific individual appeal, we wanted to provide a high-level overview. So that will include walking you through just the general process, as well as Ashley Thomas, our general counsel, will be speaking about the legal considerations that go into the New Start appeal process. And then Tess is going to conclude today's presentation, really diving into providing just some additional context about just common issues and threads that came up across multiple appeals. And so with that, I'm going, sorry, it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's going. It's a little bit delayed. It's the man on the pole. Sorry. Okay, so first we're going to start by just grounding us in the charge of the commission. And so the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission assumed the appeal responsibilities beginning 2021. So as Chair Richards said, prior to that, it was with the State Board of Education. And so under Tennessee Code annotated 4913-105, that's where it lays out the commission's responsibility specifically for hearing New Start appeals, and really all appeals. We don't just do New Start appeals, we also do amendment appeals, renewal appeals, we do all appellate work. So this statute also speaks to the commission serving as both the authorizer and the LEA for approved charter schools. So that's also something that makes this process unique. Additionally, TCA 4913-108 allows sponsors to have their allows sponsors who have had their amended applications denied by their local boards of education to appeal to the commission that denial. It's only after the amended application is denied by the local board of education that they can then appeal that decision to the charter commission. And then upon receipt of an appeal, the commission is charged with specifically conducting that de novo on the record review for each proposed charter school application. So here's a list of the 8 appeals that are currently before us for deliberation over the next 2 days. So today we're going to be discussing the 2 appeals filed by American Classical Education to open schools in Madison County as well as Murray County. And then tomorrow we will, up for discussion will be 2 appeals out of Metro Nashville Public Schools. And then we have 4 applications out of Memphis Shelby County schools, 2 of which are New Start schools, and then the other 2 Fairleigh and Cornerstone Prep Leicester campus. Those are currently ASD schools that are looking to transition out of that. So next, as we look at the appeals process flowchart, I know by now all of you have seen this slide on multiple occasions. We really continue to go back to it because it's really important to look at what our overall process is, what it consists of, and that we are continually running that process with the highest level of integrity and consistency across all applications that we receive. So as a reminder, the application process starts in December of last year, and so it's almost a full year for these applicants. So by the time October rolls around, they've been working on these applications and in this process for a good 10, 11 months. So a lot of times has gone by. And so in December, that is when they file their letter of intent with the local district. And then in order to come to the Charter Commission on appeal, they had to have had that initial application denied as well as the amended application denied by the local Board of Education. And so LEAs typically vote on initial applications in April, and then amended applications are typically voted on in July before coming to us. Upon receipt of each appeal, staff diligently works to collect information from both the sponsor as well as the local school district, and that's what becomes our record. And so we are working on building out that record as we walk through that appeal process. Amended applications and budget documents are then provided to each review committee member, and these individuals are asked to conduct their own de novo review of the application prior to sitting in the capacity interview with the sponsor. Lastly, commission staff conducts public hearings in the local LEA, and we accept written and oral public comments. The information that's gathered throughout this process is used to build out the record that was provided to all of you ahead of the discussion today, and it's also used by our executive director when she prepares her findings and recommendation report. And all of this takes place within 75 days, so we hustle to get through all of the records by that time. Next, looking at our review committees, this is a part of our Commission Policy 2.100 application review, and this requires that we assemble a review committee for each New Start application. And so all of our applications have been reviewed by, usually it's about 5 to 6 reviewers, and we do this in order to ensure that we run a rigorous process. We assemble our review committees with a balance of expertise. We vet them, we make sure that they understand charter schools, charter school autonomy, and we also want to make sure that they're free of any real or perceived conflicts. Staff then works to assemble committees to also be reflective of geographical or community considerations. And so prior to commencing any application review, staff does train all of the review committee members because we need to make sure that their ratings, and as they use the TDOE scoring rubric, that it is consistent, that it's normed prior to conducting that capacity interview. Capacity interviews are held with each sponsor, so we spend 90 minutes asking questions specifically to each sponsor as it relates to their application. And then at the conclusion of the capacity interview, the review committee meets, they build consensus, and this goes into a review committee report, which is included in each executive director's recommendation as Exhibit A. To protect the de novo review, we do not share with our review committees why the application itself was denied by the local LEA. And all members utilize the same Tennessee Department of Education rubrics that the districts use in their scoring. And then next, the public hearing. Just as I close out my portion of the presentation, just want to briefly speak about the public hearing. And this is a really important part of the record building out process because this allows us the opportunity to hear directly from both the LEA and the sponsor regarding the proposed school. We also get to hear from the district regarding their decision-making process, how they went about going about their review, and how they ultimately came to the conclusion that they did. In accordance with statute, Tess Stovall, the Commission's executive director, presided over all public hearings, and these were held within the local district boundaries where the school proposes to locate. During the public hearing, both the sponsor and the local Board of Education have the opportunity to provide opening and closing statements, and they also answer questions directly from our executive director. It's also a good time for us to hear public comments. We are able we are able to confirm that there's community support. Maybe there are people speaking in favor of the school. Sometimes there's people speaking in opposition of the school. That's all information that we glean from these public hearings. And then a summary of the public hearings is included within the executive director's recommendation, and we've provided all of you with a recording of that meeting as part of the record. And so at this time, I will pause and take any questions about process before handing off to Ashley.
Are there any questions? I would just note for the record, this process is available through our website to the public, much of it, aside from the things that are embargoed or have to be kept because of the integrity of the de novo review. We take this process very seriously and have spent hours not only looking at the hearings that we couldn't personally attend, but also reviewing all of the written comments that were submitted. For a week after each hearing, there's an opportunity for every member of the public who has a statement one way or the other to submit those written comments, and they were people spent time reading the comments and thinking about the input from those comments. So if anyone didn't get to speak at the public hearing, know that your written comments were seriously included in the record and considered by this commission. And with that, we'll go on to the next part of this.
That's me, Chairman. So I think the first thing that I want to do is make sure we're grounded in a couple of the legal standards that you all will see in the appeals coming up today. So we'll start with fiscal impact. Under TCA 4913-108, an LEA can deny the opening of a charter school if they find that opening that school would create a substantial negative fiscal impact on the district. When that is named in an appeal, the commission staff will conduct additional review. We will request additional information. And I think the important part for the commission to understand where that is named in an appeal, the burden is on the LEA to prove the substantial negative fiscal impact that opening that school would have on the district. You will see a few appeals this cycle where that is cited, and if it's cited as substantial negative fiscal impact, that is what triggers the additional review by commission staff. So what we looked at the staff level is the district's historical enrollment fluctuations and how whether or not opening that charter school would create a greater burden than the normal fluctuation the district encounters. This review matches what has happened prior at state board as well as what has been reviewed by the comptroller. Again, I want to stress that the burden is on the district to prove that, and when we get into those appeals, I believe that the executive director's recommendation can speak to the analysis of our findings where that is cited and where we reviewed. So I'm going to pause here for any additional questions or context that the executive director wants to add.
Thank you, Ashley. I think the only additional context, which we will get to when we get to the appeals, is that this fiscal impact analysis was done on both very large urban districts, some of our largest districts in the state, as well as what I would consider more mid-sized districts, 12 to 13,000 students. And it really is looking at what are the typical enrollment fluctuations that a district has? What is the overall financial health of the district? What is the projected growth or not growth within that district? And as Ashley shared, this analysis was first done in the state by the state treasurer's office. That was then moved to the State Board of Education when they had the appellate authority, and then moved to the commission. So these analyses are really following off of the previous analyses that were done. And in all, 3 districts, 4 appeals, we did not find that the districts carried the burden on substantial negative fiscal impact. We found that districts face enrollment fluctuations up and down regularly. Many districts in the state are growing by pretty significant percentages on a year-over-year basis. And so in totality, and we'll get into them as we get into each additional appeal, we saw that opening of the charter school that we were looking at simply didn't meet or exceed the enrollment fluctuations that a district typically sees. And even with those fluctuations, a district is regularly managing its budget. And additionally, we were seeing overall increases in the per pupil allocations for a district have. All of this put together, we did not find substantial negative fiscal impact based on the analysis that we conducted.
And just a general statement, I come from a part of the state that is more rural, and so I'm ultra sensitive to this particular issue. And I don't know. Your analysis is compelling in that the per pupil growth, the potential growth from Blue Oval in that one particular instance, that there's very likely going to be growth in that district, which is that's forward looking. But today, and I'm a little sensitive to this one on that issue, just because I don't know that we have. This isn't a large urban area, and so we're right now, trying to figure this out as it relates to non-urban and rural communities and what the impact's going to be. So I appreciate the work that was done, but just know I am a bit sensitive to this particular one.
Any other comments or questions on this part of the presentation? If not, let's go on.
Okay, so the next standard that I want to bring to the Commission's attention are the appeals that deal with the ASD transition schools. We have a couple of appeals this cycle that involve schools that are already established, but they have reached the end of their charter term within the ASD. When that happens, they have to go through the New Start process. The important context for the Commission in these appeals is that the question before the Commission is whether or not the operator or CMO should receive a new 10-year charter to continue operating the school. The question before the Commission is not whether or not this school should open or should stay open or if it should close. If the Commission decides that this application is denied, that school returns to the local district and they will work to transition that school back to the local district. So, Tess, were there any additional context on ASD transition or any questions from the Commission before we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay. The third context I think the Commission should be aware of are the local requirements as they appear in these appeals. The State Board of Education has a rule that allows for local districts to adopt additional policies for consideration when they are looking at New Start applications. And where the local districts have adopted those policies, the State Board rule also indicates that applicants cannot be penalized or their application cannot be denied because they failed to address that additional consideration. Relevant to this cycle, Memphis-Shelby County Board of Education has a policy that the review of a charter school application needs to take into consideration the geographical saturation. And I want to say for this Commission and your review that the Commission is not bound by this policy, nor does it carry any more weight than the additional factors that you will see in your record. However, it is a factor that does come up in the Executive Director's recommendation, and I think that it probably will come up for discussion, and it is something for you all to consider when making your decision, because it is something that has a great consequence for the schools. But I wanted to let you know that you are not bound by that policy. Tess, I'll pause here. If you have any additional context, I'll pause for any questions from the Commission.
Madam Chair, what does that mean? This issue of, again, the Memphis-Shelby County School taking consideration term is what?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Carter. So Memphis-Shelby County Board has a policy that they look at the overall number of schools and number of seats within a geographic regions of the city, and they run an analysis to determine, is that region quote unquote saturated, meaning there are more seats than there are students, or are they in need of seats? Are there more students than there are seats? And their policy says that if there is a saturation of seats in an area where a charter school proposes to locate, then they will deny that application.
Okay, and then just briefly, I want to review what is considered your record for all 8 appeals that you will consider over the next 2 days. Again, that you'll be conducting a de novo on the record review of the appeal. The information that's considered on the record is only the things that we have included for your review. That includes the correspondence from the Commission staff to both parties, the notice of appeal that included the amended application from the sponsor, recordings of the capacity interview, public hearing, and public comments, the executive director's recommendation, which includes the review committee report, as well as any statements written or you will hear from the parties in response to the executive director's recommendation. Commission staff, we limit to receipt of that information that I just named. And in light of that record, I do want to just one more time go over what the question is for you on all appeals. So the charge of the commission, once again, is to determine if an application meets or exceeds the metrics set forth in the Department of Education scoring rubric, and if approval of that application is in the best interest of the students, the LEA, or the community. If the commission finds that the answer to both of those questions is yes, then you can approve that application and the commission would become the authorizer. And just to remind you, if the application is approved, like I said, we would become the authorizer on day 31. There's a 30-day reconciliation period where the operator and the district can mutually agree for the local district to remain the authorizer for that school.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I think it's very important for folks to understand if a application was denied and it is overturned by this commission, there is a 30-day period for the sponsor to get into discussions with the home LEA and see if the school can be operated in an agreement with that home LEA. So this is not a situation where if we overturn a decision by that home LEA, the school automatically moves it to the commission. And I think in some instances, it is probably in the best interest of the sponsors to very seriously look at whether they should consider moving forward with their local LEA, given that there's community support. None of these decisions are all one-sided, and if you hear and look at the record, you'll see that within every community, there's always folks in support of the school and folks in opposition to the school. But I just want it very clear, this is not an automatic, the school becomes a school that's operated under the LEA that we operate. Now, are there other comments or questions before we proceed? Okay. All right. Well, then we're going to undertake our first appeal today.
Commissioner,
I'm sorry.
we have common issues across
okay.
applications to cover before we dive
Sorry.
in. No, thank you. I am going to cover, as was shared earlier, there are some themes that came up across multiple appeals, across multiple districts, and I thought it was important for us to address and surface those now, such that when we get into each individual appeal, you will have some context going into them. Certainly, these are not exhaustive, but I think some things that we saw across multiple applications that we wanted to address. So the first is the question around curriculum and instructional materials. I think we see a lot of districts citing that an applicant didn't meet curriculum standards, that they are planning to use textbooks that are not on the approved state list. And so wanted to ground us in what is required of charter schools in the state. First, charter schools are required to teach Tennessee state standards, state academic standards, and they are assessed on those state academic standards with the same state assessments that all other traditional charter public schools take. However, charter schools, like traditional districts, are able to, under state law, seek a waiver to use instructional materials and textbooks that are not on what's called the state approved list that's approved by the State Board of Education. There is a waiver process for districts that is outlined in statute. There is a waiver process for charter schools that is outlined in statute. And so charter schools may seek a waiver from either their authorizer or the Department of Education, and one of those allowable waivers is around instructional materials. And I will say, if you look at charter schools across the state, that is one of the most common waivers that we see, is autonomy and flexibility around instructional materials. But ultimately, those materials must be aligned to the standards of Tennessee. Second common issue.
Just a second,
So,
Commissioner.
Tess, on that point, Can you just tell us how many districts, if you have the data, or schools actually, in the traditional public school space, actually utilize that?
I do not have that data, but the comptroller did recently do a report around it that we could easily share that. But it is a very common waiver to be sought by districts to seek use of what would be considered a non-approved instructional material. That's a very common waiver request.
I just want to make sure that everybody heard that it's not just the charters, but traditional schools are doing this as well.
Yes, that's correct. Next, I wanted to address some questions that came up around the English learner, both requirements and service requirements, as well as staffing. So first, we saw a lot of districts cite that applications were referring to an outdated English learner policy in their applications, and citing this as a reason for denial. What I think is important for this commission to know is that the Department of Education's application and rubric cited an outdated English learner policy. There is a current rule that is in place now, and so that was replaced in July 2022. So we, in our review and in our capacity interviews, made sure that applicants understood the English learner requirements, the staffing requirements, such that, although they may have cited an outdated policy, that we had a conversation with them and that they understood what was required of serving English learners. We have provided this feedback to the Department of Education such that in future applications and rubrics that they are referencing the most current rule that's in place. Secondly, we noticed that the budget template that is used by all applicants does not delineate between and have an applicant delineate between a general classroom teacher and an English learner teacher. So what we were finding is that districts were saying that an applicant didn't have the correct staffing for English learners, but in reality they were embedding that into the general education teacher count. So again, in our capacity interviews, we probe to understand the staffing. Do they understand the staffing requirements? Do they have flexibility in those staffing requirements? Again, this is feedback that we've provided to the Department of Education, that in addition to having a delineation for teachers who will be serving students with disabilities, that we should also have a delineation for English learner teachers to clear up this confusion that is happening across the state. The third common issue and question that we saw was around instructional time and early release. So in accordance with statute, charter schools must meet the same instructional time requirements as traditional public schools. That means having 180 school days, 6.5 hours a day. And both traditional school districts and charter schools often will use what's called an early release day. So they don't go the full 6.5 hours. They build in additional time in their school days to allow for an early release for professional development. This is an approved model. This is something, again, traditional school districts do, charter schools do. And so we did see a number of applications that propose in their overall school model to do some level of an early release timeline. I will say, I think we counted, I think there are 5 charter schools currently within our portfolio that do some level of an early release for professional development. The one thing that we did probe in our capacity interviews with applicants was an understanding that ultimately, if they're approved, they will have to submit a school calendar, and both the authorizer and the Department of Education will have to approve their school calendar, which means that they're having the appropriate amount of instructional days and that they're meeting instructional time. And so if for whatever reason in that approval process they would need to change how they're doing professional development, change their schedule, are they open to working with the district and the Department of Education in making those adjustments, knowing that this is some of the granular operational things that would happen in the pre-opening process to set them up to open successfully. But since this issue came up in multiple applications, I did want to make sure that there is an understanding that this does happen. It happens in both traditional districts and charter schools, but there are additional steps that would happen post-approval when it comes to approval of a calendar in order to ensure that a charter school is meeting those instructional time requirements. The next common issue is waivers. So a charter school under statute is able to apply for waivers that may impede their mission and vision. There are very specific things laid out in statute that a charter school cannot waive. That includes student rights, services to students with disabilities, English learners, instructional time, teacher license, teacher evaluation, etc. But there are very common things that we see across the board that charter schools choose to waive. That includes a licensed principal or school leader, salary schedules. What that means is they're not held to the salary schedule of the district that they're authorized in. They're able to use their own strategic compensation, budget flexibility, and at-will employees. So these are very common waivers that we see charter schools across the state have. We have approved waivers for all of our charter schools that are a part of our charter agreement. But I would say this is one of the areas that is most commonly misunderstood, both for applicants and districts. We see regularly applicants who are pulling old waivers from previous applications approved a couple of years ago, and they are then not realizing that some of those statutes maybe don't even apply to a charter school, or that statute citation is out of date. That is something that we're regularly seeing. So what we do on our end as a part of our capacity interview process is to dig in with the applicant to understand, are they willing, if approved, to understand that we would review those waiver requests and have a conversation with them about what do you actually need? Here are the things you cannot waive. And here are the things actually in addition to what you've requested that we suggest that you waive. I also think it's important to note that this is not a one and done process. Charter schools are able to request waivers throughout their charter term. They are able to request waivers either from their authorizer or the Department of Education. We have provided this feedback to the Department of Education, particularly around the application and the rubric, because this is an area where we see both sides getting very hung up, not really understanding what they need to do here. And we have asked for both the Department of Education and the State Board of Education in their quality authorizing work, is there a way that we can bridge this gap on waivers so that we can, both sides and then also the commission, can have a much better understanding about the waiver process, what is necessary, what is allowable versus what is not allowable.
Tess, so if there's a request to waive certification, I don't see it on your list, is that allowed?
Thank you for the question. The only certification that can be allowed is school principal, school leader. There is no waiver around teacher, instructional, anyone who's in an instructional position. That is something that cannot be waived.
Just to clarify, if an application contained indications that waivers were requested for certain things, the approval of that application does not mean that those waivers are necessarily granted. The waiver process is initiated as a part of the New Start process, but particularly the process of coming to a charter agreement, and any waivers that were going to be in part of the school's operation would be documented in the charter agreement. Is that correct?
That is correct. As a part of a charter agreement for the commission, the approved exhibits are the approved waivers are presented as an exhibit. That those are the ones that both commission staff and operator have agreed to and are recommending approval to the full commission.
Thank you. Other questions? All right.
One
You've got
final
more thing.
issue, and then we're ready. I think the final point that I wanted to make was around enrollment and financial viability. So we are seeing trends across the state, regardless of location, that new start schools very likely will not meet enrollment projections. This is probably not surprising. It's potentially a new entity, new in a community. So they are not meeting 100% what they expected in terms of enrollment in the first year. It does take them a couple years to get settled, get established in the community to meet those enrollment projections. So what that means is that as a part of our process, both within the public hearings and capacity reviews, really pressing operators to define what does financial viability look like, knowing that it is very likely that they will not meet those enrollment projections, meaning they will not get the projected revenue that they anticipate. What are their contingency plans? What is the smallest that they can operate? And really getting a sense of, do they understand the financial landscape that they are getting into? Because I think, as we've talked a lot about, we are not only approving a school, we're approving a small business. And the financial and operational viability is paramount to success. So that's one of the things that we really pushed on to really be able to provide you all recommendations based on what we assessed in that application process. We also recognize that there are a number of grants that aren't awarded until you're authorized. And so we sought information through our process to understand what has been committed, where are individuals or applicants in a process, what is the plan should those grants not come through, to really get a sense of the financial picture of an applicant. The final thing I did want to note is that almost all applicants reference the Tennessee Department of Education Charter School Programs Grant, which is a pre-opening grant available to operators that are approved. I did want to let the commission know that the Department of Education does have that grant. It is not, they haven't released that grant yet, but that is money that will be available for operators. But it is not an automatic grant. It is a competitive grant. So certainly there is a separate application process that an applicant would go through, even post-approval, to receive those pre-opening funds. And with that is my conclusion of my presentation, and happy to take other questions.
Madam Chair, I have it.
Yes.
So on the last slide, you're seeing a consistent theme of the new charters not meeting their enrollment targets. What surprises me is by and large, these are experienced operators. So what do we do in the application process to dig into their enrollment targets, and then sort of what is their marketing strategy on the front end to validate those targets? Because this is obviously concerning.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Levine. So I think the most recent subset of data that we have to work off of are what I would consider new start operators, right? So, for example, when we opened our KIPP Nashville High School, they met their enrollment targets because they were matriculating from 8th to 9th grade. When I look at a Tennessee Nature Academy, when we think about Nashville Collegiate Prep in their first year, our Cornerstone Prep School in Memphis, they were off on what they budgeted for versus what they actually enrolled. And so what we do, and we continue to reflect on this as a part of our pre-opening process, but really digging in on a monthly basis. Where are your applications? Where are your, are we turning applications into registrations? What if we start seeing, we're in May and we're at 50% of our enrollment, we need an updated budget to know how are we building in the financial viability in order to make this work. So certainly this is something that we as a staff recognize that particularly in our areas where there's a lot of choice at this point in time, Memphis and Nashville being one of those areas, that meeting those enrollment projections are critical to the financial viability of the school and the ability to operate their academic model.
Thank you. And I want to go back to the statement you made that when a charter school is opening, they're basically small businesses. And I want to make sure it's extremely clear because this gets confused all the time, which is all charter schools in the state must, no ands, ifs, or buts, must be nonprofits. That doesn't mean no profit. Nonprofits, all the difference is between a for-profit and a nonprofit is their tax status. That's the bottom line. If a nonprofit is losing money year over year over year, they're going to fail as a for-profit business would. The difference is in the nonprofit world, in our charter schools or even traditional public schools, any money that they have left over at the end of the year is reinvested back in that school for the betterment of the students long term, not into the pockets of somebody else. So I want to make sure that gets abundantly clear because those get mixed up all the time. Having served in the nonprofit sector for most of my adult life, that's still confused by most of the general public today. But I just want to make sure that that's abundantly clear that all operators have to be nonprofits in this state. They can't be a for-profit entity because we want the money reinvested back into the students and the school, not into somebody's pocket.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodson?
This is just a clarifying question on the student enrollment projections versus what we've authorized a school to enroll at. There can be a distinction because in year one, even if a school is authorized, say, for 105 students or 300, up to however many, we do distinguish between the projected first year and what they're ultimately authorized for so they can grow into that. I want to just make sure that we're setting the right bar internally.
Yeah, so and when I'm talking about not meeting their enrollment projections, I'm not talking about what they're approved to be overall. What I'm saying is in year one, we will have 150 students.
Correct.
And then they enroll 110 students, which is very typical. I'm just using that as an example, right? Where you have provided a budget to us that we've analyzed to say, yes, you're financially viable with 150 students. Then we get to July, August, and you have 110 students who've enrolled. That doesn't mean you're not going to get to 250, whatever that means, but it's, do you have the financial grants, loans, line of credits, et cetera, to manage through the growth? And that is normal charter school work, but I think we are taking a much more active role in our review to press on that in capacity interviews and public hearings so that we can say to you, if they can enroll 100 students, they can be operationally viable.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Carter?
Test from the standpoint of, this is maybe a little bit off here in terms of what I'm asking, but is there advice or counsel that we give from a standpoint of marketing and outreach? I mean, is versus just kind of black and white? It's on you. We're here to look at being supportive. As in some ways as a teammate. But at the end of the day, it's about outreach. I mean, you've got to market particularly in a very competitive environment, right? We're not having as many babies as we had back in the 50s or the 60s. So again, is that advice, counsel provided?
I would say we ask them how they are recruiting their marketing and encouraging them to move beyond passive marketing, not just social media, not just flyers, but getting out into the community, knocking doors, really going to those community events so that they can really have face-to-face conversations with parents. I think that's really where, when we're having conversations to see how is enrollment tracking, we are wanting to see active outreach into the community. And if that's not happening, then a part of our pre-opening process is to provide them those suggestions to see in order to move from both not just interest, but actually enrolling your child, transferring records, being committed to that school.
Are there any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I think it's helpful to all of us and probably to some of the folks sitting behind you as well as to how things actually are evaluated and how things work. And with that, we're finally going to get to what I've been trying to get to. The first appeal we will hear today is from American Classical Academy, Jackson Madison. To start, Hayden, can you please read any statements received and introduce any representatives who are here today?
Thank you, Chair. Jackson Madison County Schools submitted a written statement that I'll read into the record. JMCSS respectfully disagrees with the Executive Director's recommendation dated October 2nd, 2023. The recommendation contains significant inconsistencies when compared with two other recommendations from the Executive Director without any legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons cited for these inconsistencies. In prior recommendations, the failure of the charter sponsor to identify a location for the school has been cited by the ED as a response for a denial recommendation. For example, the ED, in recommending denial of the Academy of the Arts charter school application in October 2021, stated, with regard to the facilities plan, the sponsor has not set forth any specific location for the future site of AACHS. The sponsor has yet to put forth any firm commitments to cover the costs of those facility renovations. While the identification of a facility is not a requirement for approval, reasonable facility options and location options are critical for the success of the school. The ED, in recommending denial of the Rutherford Collegiate Prep application in January 2022, stated, since no authorizer can approve a school based on contingencies or conditions, it is required that an approved application be ready to implement with few substantive details left for later development. The sponsor needs to clearly delineate its financial modeling, inclusive of facility contingencies, to demonstrate long-term viability. The ED, in recommending denial of the Binghamton Community School appeal application in October 2021, stated the applicant's operations plan partially meets standards because the review committee found the plans and timeline for renovating the temporary space to be vague. The review committee was unable to determine whether the timeline and budgeted totals were sufficient. Further, in the ED's October 2nd, 2023 recommended denial of American Classical Academy Murray application, the ED stated, without any specific details related to the facility plans, the review committee was unable to determine whether the plan for financing and renovating the facility aligned with financial projections. The American Classical Academy Jackson-Madison application has not identified a location for the proposed school except a vague reference to East Jackson, which is no different than ACAM's reference to Columbia. Without more than vague references to possible sites, how can one evaluate the facility's safety, transportation, or fiscal plans? What are the legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons for requiring more stringent requirements in Murray County than in Madison County? In recommending denial of the ACAM application, the ED stated the gaps remain within the academic plan around assessments, services to special populations, and school culture, and that the application lacks specific information and processes for oversight for students from special populations. RTI and MTSS are identified in the application as a structure to support students needing intervention, but the information is vague and does not indicate how and when students will be identified or monitoring processes. These deficiencies were cited by the JMCSS Review Committee and by the JMCSS Board of Education as reasons for denial. The ACAM and ACAJM applications were practically identical. The ED notes the deficiency in the ACAM application, but ignores the same deficiency in the ACAJM application. Are the specific needs of special populations in Madison County not as deserving of the same protection as the special populations of Murray County? What is the legitimate non-discriminatory reason to reach different conclusions in the two applications? As JMCSS is limited to a one-page response, the above inconsistencies are only a few examples of the inequitable and inconsistent application of the rubric to the ACAJM application. The expectations and standards should be applied in a non-discriminatory manner to all school districts. The ACAJM application does not meet or exceed the standards in all scoring rubric sections. Therefore, the Commission should reject the ED's recommendation and uphold the decision of the JMCSS Board of Education to deny the amended application of ACAJM. Respectfully submitted, R. Dale Thomas, attorney for the JMCSS Board of Education. And in response for the sponsor, we have Phil Schwenk.
Thanks for having me. My name is Phil Schwenk. I'm the Vice President of Schools for American Classical Education. My understanding is I have about 2 minutes to make a quick comment. So basically, I'd like to thank you for your time to hear our comments today and for the immense amount of time you've taken to go over the application, both you as commissioners as well as the review committee. Of course, we're quite excited about the Executive Director's recommendation that our our application be approved. That's an exciting element for us. That, along with obviously our recent approval in Rutherford, excites us about the potential of really serving students in various communities around the state. As far as Jackson-Madison goes, we know that this is an area that very much is excited about the potential of this school being present in its community. In fact, there's people here today that have come from Jackson to support that same thing. I think as a person who's spent a lot of time in Jackson, I've literally, we talked about going door to door. I've walked all over Jackson. I've been in many community meetings. I've talked to many individuals. The idea of East Jackson was something that was actually brought to our attention by Dr. King, the superintendent there. In fact, he brought me to a couple schools in East Jackson as potential neighborhoods where we could establish our school. And I've spent countless hours talking to families in that community specifically. And they're quite excited about the potential of this school being there. This idea that we have an approved standard application along with a community that really wants this, they really would like to see a classical public charter school in their community. It's our hope and our ask, of course, is that you would approve this application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who took time to come here from however far away. I appreciate your travels. I know I-40 isn't all that friendly to drive on, so having driven it this morning. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and move into a presentation from Tess Stovall regarding this application, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Richards. So as was stated, the application we're first discussing is for American Classical Madison, proposing to locate in the Jackson-Madison County School System. The application was denied by the Jackson-Madison County Board of Education in July of 2023. So upon appeal, the commission conducts, as was discussed, a de novo on the record review of the amended application. We held public hearing and accepted public comment. We reviewed information submitted by both parties. And it is based on this process, which includes, as we stated, the work of our review committee and a capacity review with the applicant, that I determined that the application does meet or exceed the standards outlined in the state scoring rubric, and I do believe that the approval of this would be in the best interest of the students, the district, or the community of Jackson-Madison. One of the reasons that was cited by Jackson-Madison County Board of Education in the denial was substantial negative fiscal impacts, such that the opening of this charter school would negatively impact the school system. As our general counsel stated, it is on the burden of the school system to prove the substantial negative fiscal impact of the opening of the charter school. So we collected information from Jackson-Madison County Schools, both as a part of our information collecting process and as a part of our public hearing. And in this case, the data provided by the district, as well as when we reviewed the district's audits, we found that the overall district financial position continues to improve. As we stated in my earlier presentation, enrollment has fluctuated. It fluctuated around the pandemic, like many school districts did. It is also, we've seen the district has seen an uptick in their enrollment. And the district also projects a continued enrollment increase specifically related to the Blue Oval City project. So when we reviewed the data, we saw that the annual fluctuations in enrollment that the district is able to manage financially, and that the opening of American Classical Jackson would be not significantly different than the regular fluctuations that they are able to manage. In totality, we simply did not find evidence that Jackson-Madison County proved that the approval of the American Classical Madison would constitute a substantial negative fiscal impact on the district. So when we reviewed the amended application for American Classical Madison and conducted the capacity interview and the public hearing, there were two distinguishing strengths of this application that I want to speak to first, because it's going to carry through the remainder of my presentation and it will carry through the application itself. So first is that the school identifies a school leader who has experience in the model that they're proposing. That school leader's resume and information were included in the amended application. That school leader attended both the public hearing and the capacity interview. So we were able to ask the school leader about key academic, operational, and financial plans to assess the ability to implement the proposed plan as written in the application. Secondly, the identified strength is the identification of a community. I disagree with the district's statement that they did not identify a community. They identified an area of Madison County, East Jackson, where they plan to locate. Now, without authorization, it is understandable that they do not have a facility identified yet, but what we were able to do is review the application through the lens of proposing to locate in the East Jackson area, looking at the schools that they had identified that they might be pulling students from, be able to look at the demographics of those areas to determine, and ask questions about whether or not their academic model would be able to meet the needs of those students. I think within the application in the rubric, it asks an applicant to identify a targeted community, and they did that in this application. What you will hear later is that in the other application from this applicant, there was not a specific community, at least at this point, identified. So American Classical Madison, in their amended application, proposes to open eventually a K-12 option in, as I stated, East Jackson. And in their application, they presented a very clear mission and vision that would be overseen by the identified school leader, Ms. Spry. And while it is not a requirement to identify a school leader within the application, I think it's important to note that the way that this operator has structured their network and they're structured their school, the school leader has significant responsibility in implementing and making key academic, operational, and financial plans. Therefore, the experience, the knowledge, the capacity of that school leader is paramount in determining whether or not the school and the academic model will be able to be open successfully and with fidelity to the proposed model. The identified school leader has experience opening another Barney Charter School Institute affiliated charter school, which is operating with the same academic model that this charter school proposes to operate in. And within the capacity interview, we ask very specific questions about assessments, serving students with disabilities, English learners. How will they be identified? How will they be serviced? What will RTI look like? And the school leader was able to provide significant detail about what that would look like within the school that bolstered the information that was provided within the academic model. Again, I think it's important to note that because the school leader is the ultimate determiner of what are the assessments going to be? How will school culture be developed? What will the discipline model ultimately end up looking like? That the ability for the review committee and staff to ask direct questions of the school leader and receive direct answers as a part of that capacity interview is what really bolstered what was written in the amended application, such that the two of those really provided a complete picture of what that academic model would look like. Additionally, we found that with the identified school leader, that the startup plans and the pre-opening process had a high likelihood of success because that school leader is the individual who will be running the startup process primarily for the school. They're the ones primarily responsible for student recruitment, staff recruitment. Certainly the network stated that they would help with from the facility standpoint, but really the startup operations of the school is reliant on that school leader. And so this individual, as a part of the capacity interview, we were able to assess their experience opening a similar model of a school and how that would translate into the proposed model that we're discussing today. We also pressed around the curriculum crosswalk. The applicant in the amended application stated that they were working on a crosswalk of the proposed curriculum to ensure alignment to Tennessee academic standards. We assessed whether, what is the timeline for the curriculum crosswalk? How will those gaps be filled, if there are any? And primarily that is the responsibility of the school leader to do that. So again, we were able to assess that individual's understanding and responsibilities around the standards and ultimately the curriculum. Additionally, the school leader was able to provide significant detail around services to students with disabilities and English learners, speaking very granular detail about how those individuals would be identified in service within the model. And we're able to provide a comprehensive plan of what that would look like within the school, even down to the staffing requirements and understanding that the staffing model was going to need to be flexible depending on what the ultimate student enrollment would be. As I stated, another strength is the identified geographic location of the proposed school. They identified an area, East Jackson, where they plan to locate and had already looked at multiple facility options within the community. They have also talked to the county commission about a potential school. We also heard testimony at the public hearing that at some point the superintendent of Jackson Madison had shown some potential options and had encouraged the applicant to be in the East Jackson area. And so with both the description of the East Jackson area within the application, that was then further enhanced by what we heard in the capacity interview and the public hearing, this then allowed us to determine if the academic model was reflective and would be support the needs of those students. Was the community support related to that area of East Jackson? Was there sufficient demand in that area for this proposed school? And were the facility plans aligned to what they had identified within their application? And again, operationally, we found that the school leader who had been identified would have a key operational role. As I stated, the startup plans are under this individual's responsibility, as well as the school leader would hold many operational and financial responsibilities within the school. Ultimately, that school leader reports to their proposed governing board, with the network staff that are on staff for American Classical really not doing any day-to-day supports of the schools. They're much more focused on direct board support. And so we were able to assess the potential school leaders' experience in staff recruitment, professional development, and really those overall school operations and financial operations that are needed under this model. Another factor in my recommendation is the facility plan that was contained within the application. They have made, as I stated, significant progress on their facility plan, identified areas in their proposed geographic location, and had conversations with other governmental entities within Jackson Madison about possible facility locations. And finally, we found that the financial plan was sound. They do have the ability to access funds from the American Classical Education Foundation should startup costs or renovation costs exceed what they are anticipating. We also determined, based on the feedback from the sponsor, that they would be able to open with 150 students. They are projecting to have, I think, 340 students in year one, but operational and financially, they could open with 150 students. At the public hearing and throughout this process and the written comments that we received, we have seen both demonstrated community support for the school. We have also received and heard demonstrated community support against the opening of the school. Both of those public comments, those feelings are valid, and I think that is something that the school will ultimately have to work through if this commission approves them, is to really establish themselves and be a partner within the community. to build a relationship with community organizations, with the school district, regardless of who the ultimate authorizer or LEA is going to be, such that the school opening is done with the community in mind, and it feels like it's a part of ultimately the community, because, I think you all have heard it too. There is real passion on both sides of this topic around the opening or not opening of this school. So based on the totality of the evidence presented within this entire record, that is the basis for my recommendation for American Classical Madison. And at this time, I will turn it back to Chair Richards for questions or discussion from the commission.
Thank you, Tess. At this point in time, I'm going to open this up to the commissioners. You can ask questions of Tess. You can make comments about this application. This is a chance for a discussion and for us to sort of see where we are on this application. We certainly appreciate your evaluation and recommendation. And who wants to start? Commissioner Smith.
Big surprise there. Couple of things. So Hayden, well, first of all, do we have anybody here from the Jackson-Madison County Public Schools? Because it would be really nice to be able to ask you some questions. Mostly because of the statement that was made, and I believe if memory is serving me correctly, in their letter they referred to Rutherford Collegiate Prep that you recommended in denial, and I believe we overrode that because if Jackson-Madison was actually paying attention, it's because the school district was playing games with the applicant. And I'm starting to sense that same thing to a degree here. The fact that we asked them for their per pupil spending. They were unable to provide it. Yet it's available on the comptroller's website. It's available. So they weren't willing to engage in fairly and in a good faith discussion with even our own staff trying to get some information. The other thing that also I think the district needs to be careful about is looking at it, I see a difference of the 15 people on the initial review. Then they added some people for the appeal process. And as they described it in the public hearing, it was more for some people that had some unique expertise, especially around some fiscal things. But the people they added weren't actually in the fiscal department. One was a principal and one was an academics officer. So I kind of find some inconsistencies between their public comments and then what we actually see in there. The other thing that I think that Jackson-Madison also needs to be careful of here, and it's this. If they were a great performing school system, and I want to compare them to similar large school systems. I don't want to compare apples to oranges here. Then I think, reading proficiency in Jackson-Madison is at 17%, 13% below the state average. Math is at 10%. That's 18% below the state average. Compared to my home county of Knox, which we have one charter school. The school board just approved a second. Knox County, which is about twice as big, actually is beating all of the state averages in reading and math proficiency. Are we great? Are we where we want to be? No one is arguing that we're perfect. But I think that what it's showing is the school system hasn't adequately met the needs of students in those communities, which is why they're looking at this. And I applaud the sponsor for looking in an area that has been typically underserved, looking at how they can meet the needs of those students. So those are just some things that I wish the school systems would be here to help answer questions. It's hard to get answers from an empty chair. So I want to make sure that we state that now for any future school districts that may be. It's hard to stand up for you when you can't be here to answer questions that we have related to things that we're seeing in here. The other thing that I think is of concern to me is around the fiscal impact and the fact that they could not, and they didn't even address it in their letter. They didn't address the negative fiscal impact when it was brought up, the fact that their fund balance is more healthy than it has been in the last few years. They're expecting an increase in enrollment with the Blue Oval City of, I think it was 8.1%. Again, looking at it in your recommendation, Tess, they went from 1.8 to $3.4 million between the two. Couldn't really justify that. There's just a lot of questions that I wish the district were here to answer, but we're left to surmise that, again, it's games being played by them just making up numbers because they're not here to answer those. So that's a frustration for me and gives me hesitation to back up the school board in their decision, because we don't have somebody here to answer those questions, while potentially just leaving kids to flounder in a system that's failing them already. So I want to start there and then leave it some room for my other commissioners, but that's just what I took away initially from all of this.
Commissioner Grissom.
So last year, as I recall, when ACE had a number of applications, and one of the criticisms is that they did not have members, Tennesseans, on their board. And that's one of the things I think Jackson, Madison County brought up. It's my understanding, and for the record we saw, that is not the case going forward. There are Tennesseans on this board that have been publicly identified. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, that is correct. They have members of the governing board who are residents of the districts in which they applied. We also saw members of the governing board both participate in the capacity interview so that the review committee had the opportunity to ask questions of the governing board members, as well as members of the governing board participating in the public hearing.
Commissioner Levine.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and then maybe some observations. I think first questions, in reading, and I read very carefully the school district lawyer's letter, and he seems to be relying heavily on the idea of precedent, that you've evaluated certain school district or school applications a certain way, and that should imply therefore that the same approach ought to be taken in each case. And I understand why an attorney would be making that argument. That's kind of how they work. But I guess the question I have is that we don't approach it from a judicial standpoint. Each application stands on its own based on the unique circumstances in that community, right?
That is correct. I think it's important to note that each year the Department of Education revises the application and the rubric. So literally every year we are training our staff and review committee on the new rubric, the new application. The review committee from last year that reviewed last year's applications that were referenced is not the same review committee that reviewed this year's applications, because we really believe in the importance of looking at each application individually, and to your point, Commissioner Levine, letting it either stand on its own or not stand on its own.
Right. I have to agree with Commissioner Smith as well. I actually was looking forward to having some conversations with the school district about the whole financial piece of this. And since no one's here for me to ask those questions of, I don't have their argument here other than what they've said in their letter. But the issue of financial impact on a non-urban school system, as I said earlier, is an important one for me. But the compelling fact here, when I look at a place like Sullivan County or like Johnson City or Kingsport, where I'd be very sensitive to that. And however, those two high schools are among the top 10 in the state. And when I see data that shows that we are so miserably failing these students, when at the end of the day this is all about student success, and we see a system that's failing this badly, and an alternative is being proposed, and they're not even here to tell us why this is a bad idea and engage with us, I don't know what to make of that. But other than they didn't want to be here and be scrutinized. So I'm putting on the record, in a non-urban or rural area, I'm very concerned about making sure we don't do financial harm to existing schools. But in this particular instance, I don't know how you cannot give these parents an alternative when the system is performing this poorly. So those are. Oh, and by the way, in talking to legislators who supported the creation of this commission, consistently, every argument I've heard from legislators, just thinking about their intentions here, is this is exactly what they had in mind. A school system where kids are trapped in a school system where, what did you say, 17%? 17%
reading.
And 10% math proficiency. That is, maybe I understand why they're not here to answer those questions.
Commissioner Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a founder of a charter school in Detroit, Michigan, not here in Tennessee. And so at the end of the day, my partner and I, when we started this odyssey some years ago, because both of us are Detroit boys, and my partner is Jalen Rose, former pro basketball player. When we came together, it was about, again, trying to make a difference in the lives of these scholars. Because we want it, and we still do. We still desire scholars who come to us 3 grades behind where they should be in reading, 4 grades behind where they should be in math. At the end of the day, it's about trying to make sure that they were academically prepared, that there was rigor, so that by the time they finished school, high school, and ours is a 9 to 16 model, we just don't stop at 12th grade. But the idea was to look at having them compete with the suburban schools and schools throughout the country, so that they, in fact, could look at being prepared by the time they finished. So I really do appreciate both the commissioners in terms of your points about the issue of inequality and the fact that, again, within that school system, these students are not where they should be. So therefore, what options do these parents have? Do these scholars have? If they want to really compete in the real world. And so this is an option. That's the whole concept of charter school. It's an option to look at allowing people to look at having a choice, to be in a safe environment, but to act more critically, look at having an enriched academic experience. So that's a statement. I do have a question, because at the end of the day, when you look at the demographics throughout the country, majority of the charter schools serve people of color. So my question to Tess and to maybe the representative from the school is, as much as we might have a facility, who are we serving? When you talk about demographics, that's something I'd like to know. Who, in fact, are we really targeting, and who will make up the majority of the population base? Tess?
Thank you for that question. So to follow along with the identification of a specific location in Jackson, of East Jackson, we were able then to validate the proposed enrollment demographics of the school. And so their enrollment demographics mirror what Jackson, Madison County, and East Jackson, those student demographics are, being the majority, probably 3/4, projecting to be students of color, economically disadvantaged. And so why it is important to identify a specific area within a county in a district to locate is that then allows us to validate the enrollment projections, ensure that they do intend to serve the community in which they're planning to locate, and that their student demographics mirror or closely mirror with the community where they plan to locate.
Commissioner Tudor?
Thank you. Question about, I just want to make sure I have this right. So we're looking at the rubric, you have to meet or exceed, and a big component of operations is facility. But just to be clear, a applicant does not have to specifically identify a facility in order to meet or exceed that part of the rubric. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Secondarily, they would, though, have to identify, and I don't know how you necessarily define this, but they do have to identify a community. Is that also correct?
That is correct.
And in this case, for Jackson, they did not identify a facility, but they did identify a community of East Jackson. We've in the record, and then we've heard about the activities in that community. I noticed, so and that last statement is accurate.
That's correct. So within the academic section there is a section that's called, community focused demand. Beth can pull up the exact, but within that they have to describe what is your targeted community, what are the proposed schools that you plan of that community, what are the academics of those schools, what are the demographics of that area, and then what are your school's proposed demographics, such that you can see, okay, number one, there is a community need for this school. The school academic achievement is maybe low, or maybe they're not serving a particular population as well as they could be. And then when we get to the facility plan, it is not a requirement that they say, I will be located at 500 James Robertson Parkway, but it is, here are facilities within the East Jackson area that we have evaluated. Here is what we will need in order for a school to meet our academic model. Here's our facility timeline. Here is who is responsible for the facility. Because again, we recognize that it is it's unrealistic for a school who has not been approved to be able to say, here is my lease that I've signed for a facility, because they haven't been approved yet. But we're seeing both a plan, finances, and capacity to execute on the proposed facility plan.
Commissioner Smith?
And I just want to follow up. Earlier, when you gave us some common issues that we were all, that everybody was kind of dealing with, Tess, you stated that several of the applicants were looking at an outdated rule, and that they were mixing English language learners in with the population. Did any of that play into effect in this that could have resulted in the school giving a lower, the system giving a lower score from partially meets that might have made the meet expectations that we did differently in our de novo review?
We would need to look into that, of whether or not that was specifically cited. On the top of my head, I don't think that was cited by the district, but let us look into that and we will let you know.
Commissioner Lauren Smith?
Tess, could you speak to your enrollment projections, or at least I think they said they need 150 in order to operate? Could you?
Sure. So a part of the application is letters of community support. And I think one of the areas that we really press on is, do you have documented community support, both either within the application as well as throughout the process, this appeal process? Are we seeing that there are people who are interested in meeting in attending the school? I think what we saw is kind of earlier is that within their application, they had documented letters of support, both from members of the community as well as people who said that they were interested in sending their children there. As well as in the public hearing, we heard from parents who said, yes, I am an individual who'd be interested in sending my child to this school. And I also I took to comfort when they said that operationally they could make it work with 150 students, because I think any school that is opening in a community where there is no charter school, they may be the first charter school. It's an uphill, battle to build trust within the community. That's something that came up in the public hearing is, how do you build trust within the community, bridge those divides? And so, I think they have documented that they've spent time in the community building support, but they will have to continue that in order to meet those enrollment projections. And I think the fact that they have identified the school leader who has been in the community and then will be in the community, that then lends a level of trust in the school being able to talk to that head of school, that principal, such that they can, at a minimum, meet the 150 enrolled students and potentially be more.
There are a couple things that were very interesting to me about this application. First of all, to speak on behalf of the school district who isn't here, they were very adamant at the public hearing that they have several high-performing schools, but they are optional schools that draw from a broader population within the community. And it's obvious at those schools they are able to meet or exceed the state averages for performance. But if you looked at the East Jackson area, and I think this is one reason why the communications came from the district to the sponsor, the performance levels in that community for primarily people of color were far below what is needed. And they were encouraging, considering that neighborhood, and it was kind of an unusual hearing because I don't know that I've ever seen a situation where we've had part of the school administration of what would be the authorizing entity talking about facilities with the sponsor while the authorizing entity is pretty much opposed to the situation. It just is an indication of the divisiveness within the community. But I think there's some willingness to get to a good alternative that works for kids. I mean, it was obvious to me that the school district administration's heart was in the right place. I mean, they're trying to do what's best for kids. They didn't agree that this was the way to do it, but there wasn't an indication that they weren't thoughtful on that subject. The East Jackson community is a very specific identified location. They've talked about several facilities that might be possible, and we have in the past approved authorization for charters for communities where they've got it down to a given community and a couple schools or a couple buildings. So I don't think that anything that's been proposed is inconsistent. I am also very sensitive to the negative impact on a small district, but this area is going through a generational transformation. There will be 8,000 employees at that Blue Oval City, and this is the largest nearby community. So the amount of growth in school population that's going to occur in the next 4 to 6 years is amazing. That scheduled to open.
I'm sorry, when you're done.
So to me, that's one reason why I looked at this with a little different view from a totally rural district, because they're going to experience growth like no rural district, aside from maybe Spring Hill and some of the areas in East Tennessee experienced. So it's a very different situation. Now, that being said, I am troubled by one thing about this application, and that is this will be the fourth application that this sponsor has filed without providing this crosswalk from the curriculum to the Tennessee standards. And as we pointed out in our summary, meeting the Tennessee standards for curriculum is not optional. It is required by state law. And as I sit here today, I have yet to see anything that shows any kind of indication that the proposed math curriculum has anything to do with Tennessee standards. Now, you've made a commitment that the curriculum you use will meet Tennessee standards, and I know that this process will make sure that you honor your commitment. But in the past, we have looked very negatively on people who come through the application process repeatedly and don't come up with a way of showing that they meet Tennessee standards. I know this is used outside the state of Tennessee, but that is irrelevant to us. All we are worried about is making sure that the school meets Tennessee standards as required by law. So I'm just letting you all know how I feel about that. Commissioner Levine.
Yeah, first of all, that's well said. Tess, how many applications up till now have we had, and how many have we approved?
So we have had 16, not including this cycle, 16 applications. I think 5 have been approved.
Right. So we have denied far more than we've approved. And this is sort of a general comment, because I made a very similar comment a couple of years ago. When we first started, we were getting letters from school districts saying generally they were opposed to this, and there weren't real good arguments. They were just, we don't like this. And we said at the time, please take us seriously. We want to hear from you. We want to hear, what your arguments are. Let's talk about the kids and what your plan is. And then many of them took heart and started engaging with us. And what I would say to the school systems, and this is a good example where I really did want to hear from the school system. I had legitimate concerns. Some of them have been articulated, and I had questions for them. And without them being here to answer those questions, it sort of says a lot to me as a commissioner. Like I mean, this is a serious enough issue that we're a state entity. We have the ability to make a decision here. And if they're not here engaging with us, what does that say to us about how they're engaging with parents who want options for their kids? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think whether the county that we're currently talking about is even watching this, or if there's others that are paying attention to this, what I would say is please take this process seriously and engage with us so that we can actually have a direct discussion. I trust our staff, and my instincts are to support the work that our staff does. But at the end of the day, it's my decision. And if you're going to take my decision-making process for granted, I don't know what options you're leaving me with other than to vote for what staff is recommending. So there's an opportunity for them to make an argument to us and to engage and have us have this discussion. And I think we've said it so many times, and so many school districts have taken us seriously. And most of those cases, we've agreed with them overwhelmingly, only 5 being approved out of 16. So just an opportunity, a lesson learned, hopefully going forward.
Are there any other comments or questions? Do you want to answer?
Well, I do have a couple of things that I'll say. So first, I do think that this is something that we should think about after we get through this process, this cycle, is Chair Richards and I can talk about, do we want to expand the opportunities that we provide currently in policy and rule around response to our executive director's recommendation. Currently, what we allow is a written statement, which the district provided, or coming in person, which the applicant did. We do not provide within our process further opportunities for engagement directly with you all. But that's something, if it's the will of the body for us to create that part of the process, certainly that's something that we can look at after the process is completed, such that we're both upholding our appellate functions, but allowing you all as commissioners to have enough opportunity to engage with both applicant and district in order to inform your overall decision. So I did want to state that that's something that we will put on the list, make a note, and we can think about that for next cycle. The next thing is, one thing is I did want to point out that the challenge that we had particular in this district around fiscal impact. It has been noted several times that there was a substantial difference in what the fiscal impact that was communicated to the sponsor when they were denied. It was about $1.5 million. And then in their statement to the commission around fiscal impact, that fiscal impact was over $3 million. When we ask in the public hearing why there was such a significant difference, there was really no compelling answer as to why. And so when we think about, is a district providing the data to carry the burden, it's very hard for us to come to the conclusion to support the burden when we can't track how they're getting to what is that substantial negative fiscal impact. And so that was a real challenge for us in our process, as well as information that we requested and the district said they didn't have. The final thing in response to Commissioner Eddie Smith's question. So the district cited 74 reasons for denial of the application. One of those was that their academic plan fails to address identifying English learners and serving special populations. So it wasn't specific to, they cited an outdated English learner policy, but they did cite serving special populations generally as a concern. Certainly that is an area that we probe both in the application and within the capacity interview. And so when we probed and asked questions of the school leader around serving special populations and identifying English learners staffing, the school leader was able to very easily answer those questions and address what it would look like within the academic model.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? Are we ready for a motion? All right, is there a motion to adopt the resolution to overturn the denial of American Classical Academy Jackson Madison's amended application?
Support.
Second?
Second it.
Take a roll call vote on that.
Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Levine?
Aye.
Commissioner Patterson?
Yes.
Commissioner Eddie Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Lauren Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Tudor?
Yes.
Commissioner Woodson? Aye. Commissioner Griscom? Aye. Chair Richards?
Aye.
Madam Chair, you have 9 ayes.
Motion's been adopted. The commission has determined to adopt a resolution to overturn the denial of American Classical Jackson Madison's amended application. Okay, then we're going to move on. The final appeal we will hear today is from American Classical Academy Maury. In accordance with Commission Policy 2.000, a representative of each appeal has the opportunity to submit a written statement or be recognized for up to 2 minutes in advance of the Commission's discussion on the appeal. Hayden, can you please read any statements received and introduce any representatives who are here today?
Murray County Public Schools submitted the following statement for the record. The Murray County Board of Education, the board, concurs with the recommendation of the Executive Director of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission as to the amended application of the American Classical Academy in Murray County. American Classical Academy's application is the first charter school application received in Murray County. The board sought to provide a fair and balanced process for the review of the application and spent many hours both as a committee and as a full board in analyzing the information submitted and questioning the applicant. The board appreciates the applicant's willingness to serve Murray County and believes in general terms that its educational model is sound. However, the board maintains that there are several areas in which the amended application fails to meet or exceed the Department of Education scoring rubric. Further, the board was unable to determine that approval of the amended charter application is in the best interest of the community to be served, because no specific community was identified. Murray County is very diverse from a socioeconomic standpoint. The board was asked to assume a one-size-fits-all viewpoint and make a generalized determination that a school which could meet the needs of students in Columbia could also serve the interests of more rural areas in the county. Similarly, the applicant fails to identify who would hold several key leadership positions within the school. This omission is particularly glaring in light of the fact that the applicant has no other operational models in Tennessee. The board does not believe that the approval of the amended charter application would be in the best interest of either the LEA or the citizens of Murray County. The board appreciates the assistance provided by the staff of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission and will incorporate the comments of the executive director in its review of future applications. And on behalf of the applicant, we have Joel Shellhammer.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say thank you so much for your consideration today, and we really appreciate the time the staff has spent on review of this application. I'm Joel Shellhammer, Executive Director of American Classical Education. As the Executive Director, and in terms of the report by the Executive Director, there are two things that were called out as reasons for the recommendation for denial. The first is the lack of identification of a school leader. The second is lack of identification of a specific location. On the first one, in terms of a school leader, as was noted in the review, this is not required under the rubric. In the joint capacity interview that was held with American Classical Education and the staff, we had one of our school leaders present, and we also communicated that we had 3 finalists for this role, and are happy to announce that if we are approved, we're able to name our finalists for this head of school role. We also clarified that if approved, we would be opening the school in FY25, which gives us more than 2 years for that head of school to be on the ground in the community, working to build that support and manage the number of tasks that the executive director has clarified do fall on that particular individual. As it relates to the community location, the application defines Murray County as the community for this school. It does not define a specific area of the community, and that is partially because, as is mentioned in the review, when we went to file an amended application with Murray County Schools, we were told specifically, and we provided this information to staff, to not submit an amended application, but instead to respond to the questions that were submitted to us by the board. There was no opportunity, and the review process of the commission allows no opportunity for the sponsor to provide additional clarifying information on the community. But it has been said in the capacity interview and is widely known in Murray County, recently being reported by the Tennessee Firefly, the location for the school has been identified as the North Columbia area. So this is clearly known. It's something that we would have been able to talk about had we been able to submit an amended application. But I'm sure this board can appreciate that when your potential authorizer is instructing you to do something, it's very difficult for us to depart from that when we're seeking approval from them. Lastly, I just want to mention the support of the community. It's very clear, given that Mayor Sheila Budd is here in person, that we had board members speak on our behalf, we had elected state officials, that there is widespread support for this community across the entire county. We urge this board to hold us to the standard of the rubric and to ensure that this is, and to understand that this is in the best interest as is expressed through the widespread community support demonstrated in this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move to a presentation by Tess Stovall regarding American Classical Academy Murray. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Richards. So the appeal before us today, this afternoon, is American Classical Murray, which proposes to locate in Murray County. As we've noted, this is the second of two appeals from American Classical Education. And as we've noted, we treated these two appeals separately in terms of a record. And before I go into my reasons for supporting my recommendation, I do want to take a few minutes to discuss my review of the process that Murray County Board of Education took in reviewing this application. So the process taken by the Murray County Board of Education that the sponsor agreed to was in lieu of an amended application. The board submitted written questions that the applicant then responded to. This does not align to the process outlined in statute. This does not align to the process outlined in state board rule. And because of this deviation from the process, it made our appellate review very complex and very challenging. We pressed both parties in the public hearing to understand how we got to this process. Both the representatives from the Maury County Board of Education as well as the representatives of the sponsor. I would say my greatest concern going into this evaluation was that the sponsor had not agreed to the process, that it's been deviated. And the fact is that they admitted that they did, and the documentation that we received from them documented that they agreed to this process, that they did not object to the idea of not submitting an amended application and therefore just submitting written responses. So when the Murray County Board of Education reconvened in July to vote a second time on the application, which included these written responses, they ultimately denied the application in its totality. There were references within both the public hearing as well as the record that there was an agreement from the sponsor that the initial application and these written responses would therefore assume the role of an amended application and be the basis of the charter agreement. And so that is what then we took as the basis of our quote unquote amended application, our de novo review, and what is the basis of our recommendation here today. But as I noted in my executive director's recommendation is that Murray County must update and review their process to ensure alignment to statute and state board rule, which includes allowing operators to submit an amended application that is then evaluated by the state scoring rubric, because it allows the applicant to correct deficiencies that were noted in the initial application. It then allows for a much cleaner appellate process if and when it comes to the commission, so that all parties, including the commission, deeply understand the process that was followed, and there is a fair shot throughout all steps of the application. So I appreciate Murray County within their statement stating that they will take my comments to heart, because I do think that there are deficiencies, and there were deficiencies in the process that Murray County needs to address for future applications. Additionally, before I get into my reasons for my recommendation, I wanted to speak to the citing of substantial negative fiscal impact by Murray County schools. So as we have discussed, if it's referenced in the denial, then the commission is charged with conducting a substantial negative fiscal impact review. However, while in complete review of the record, it was actually unclear if the Murray County Board of Education deliberated and discussed that substantial negative fiscal impact was a reason for denial. It was never brought and discussed in the July board meeting. It was only referenced in a resolution that was ultimately signed by the board chair and not actually adopted by the entire board. even when during the public hearing, the only time substantial negative fiscal impact came up was from a member of the public who came and spoke to substantial negative fiscal impact. It was not brought up by the Maury County Board of Education. This is concerning because when statute says that a district can cite this as a reason for denial, and then therefore the district carries that burden, we are expecting that a district to be able to document how they came to this determination, be able to discuss both with the applicant and with the commission how they made this determination. And it was not clear within the record, and even when we asked for additional documentation from the district, whether this really was a reason that the board considered when making its determination. Ultimately, though, to fulfill our statutory charge, we completed a substantial negative fiscal impact analysis. And similar to the conversations we've had earlier, we saw that the district has had fluctuating enrollment. The superintendent at the public hearing spoke to both growth coming out of the pandemic within Maury County, as well as continued projected growth throughout the county. And similarly to the other districts, we saw that the district has been able to manage through the fluctuations in enrollment from a fiscal perspective. As such, we did not determine that there was evidence provided by Maury County Public Schools to meet the burden of substantial negative fiscal impact. I will now move into my recommendations for denial of the Maury County, American Classical Maury County. We, again, followed the process that is outlined in statute. And ultimately, there are two deficiencies within this application that are going to carry through, similar to the previous conversation that we had. The first is an identified targeted community within Maury County. And I think what is important to note is the size and diversity of Maury County. And even when pressed in the public hearing about a location and a community, it was difficult to ascertain where within the community the school was really targeting their outreach and their proposed locations. This then carries through for a facility plan. It carries through for community engagement and demographics, as we spoke to earlier. Secondly was the lack of a school leader. And while I understand that a school leader is not required in the rubric for approval, it is also important to note that the school leader within this model is the key decision maker for the school. This individual decides of the suite of assessments that are outlined in the application, what assessments the school will take, how they will implement their services to students with disabilities, what their staffing will be, how they will recruit teachers, ultimately what the school culture and school discipline will be. This individual is responsible for overseeing the professional development, their finances, their budget. So because the applicant has built a model that provides significant autonomy and decision-making to a school leader, there were places within the application that we were not able to gather further information for this specific school in this specific location in order to meet the standards outlined in the rubric. As I have stated, that the lack of identified location compromises an applicant's ability to present how their academic model will meet the standards within the rubric, how they will meet the needs within the community, where they propose to locate, and how those demographics then relate to the proposed demographics of the school. Maury County has a variety of population centers, a variety of demographics, and so it was difficult for us to assess whether or not the proposed model reflected the community that they plan to serve, and then how that community would then engage with the operator. I also note that this is something that we asked specifically about in the capacity interview and the public hearing, to understand that, was there additional information that could be provided with regard to the location in the community? And, even within the public hearing, there was a conversation of, well, we will just continue to listen to where the community wants us and listen to public feedback. But even that was not able to say within the Maury County area, where will you, particularly where is the targeted community for this school? I think it's important to note that the commission and commission staff in our review, and you all as a review of the record, we understand that there is great demand within Maury County for a public charter school option. That was evident in the public hearing. That is evident within even the application. That is evident within the written comments that we've received. However, given the fact that there is a real lack of a targeted community, it's hard to then see how that exactly translates into specific enrollment projections for the school at this point. I completely agree that Maury County is a growing district. It seems to have a need. It seems to have apparent demand generally for an option other than a traditional public school. I think is an area where a public charter school could be a great option. But we have to assess whether or not the application is ready to go as written currently. As we have discussed, the academic model rests on the school leader responsible for ensuring the curriculum is aligned to state standards, selecting and determining the suite of assessments, implementing special populations, student discipline, school culture, monitoring academic performance. They are responsible for hiring, human resources, staff development, managing any legal issues with an outside attorney, and managing the budget. That's a significant load for a school leader, and it is important to assess the capacity of that identified school leader in evaluating whether or not the model is ready for approval. I do acknowledge that the financial plan does meet the standard. There's documented support from a foundation that is available to provide additional resources should the school need it and throughout their startup plans. I also acknowledge that both within the capacity interview and in the public hearing, even here today, that the applicant states that their intent is to delay until August of 2025 if approved by the commission. And while I appreciate that statement, I do think it's important for the commission to understand that no authorizer, including the commission, can approve on a contingency. And even if that contingency is to delay until August of 2025. Our charge is, does the application that sits in front of us today, that is a part of the record, is it ready to go for the August 2024 school year, which it proposes to open in the written application? And at this point, it is my determination that the application is not ripe for approval, and that is the basis of my recommendation. The commission is responsible for ensuring that only those schools that are ready to open and have a documented likelihood of success should be approved. And while I appreciate the passion of the sponsor, I appreciate the passion of the community, many of whom are here today in desire of a public charter school option. I also acknowledge that the Maury County, American Classical Maury County, is simply not meeting the standards yet for approval. I strongly suggest that the applicant take the feedback that we have provided throughout this process, that the commissioners may provide if ultimately Maury County's decision is upheld, to review their application to move it closer to meeting the standard. I also recognize that the operator has a school that it proposes to open in Rutherford County and Jackson-Madison, which will give it an opportunity to refine its academic model and operations for future applications. And with that, I am happy to take any questions and turn it over to Chair Richards.
Commissioner Tudor.
I think my first comment is it seems like and thank you first for all your hard work in reviewing this, but it seems like the staff was somewhat hobbled by two things. One, that can be controlled in the future, and then two, which is always going to be an issue. The first is process and the second is timing. So I had to read twice when I first encountered that there wasn't an amended application. And I think, in all fairness, I obviously don't know all the context, but I'd like to think that was in good faith, right? Where they said, hey, look, we don't need to go through this whole procedural thing. Let's just kind of figure out what the hurdles were. We can kind of collaborate, work on it. I'm hoping that was the intent, but that's a real problem. And, I don't want to be ugly or to be severe, but that just can't happen again, because it directly and negatively affects your ability and our ability on the record to look at an amended application that could address some of these issues, in particular, for example, location. So I would hope for those listening that in the future, the process was established for a reason, for very good reasons, and even if there is even if there's perhaps an inclination to do something a little bit more informally, in good faith, to shorten the process, to collaborate, whatever the intent, as pure as it may be, it becomes a real problem for you. It becomes a real problem for us. So that's the process. Timing, I think that's never going to go away, right? We just heard that that it sounds like they've selected somebody. If that had been several months ago, who knows how things would have turned out. I think. One more comment and then a question here. So, the comment that it was agreed to by the applicant, this sort of informal process rather than the amended application, is a real problem for me, and I don't want to over-lawyer this, but that that sort of consent, is it knowing, is it voluntary? I don't know. When you're looking to someone to approve, or a body to approve something, they say, hey, look, I'd really like to handle this collaboratively and formally outside of normal processes. That's not a free and voluntary decision for an applicant to make. That's just not equal. It's not, simply put. So that's my comment, which again, I think all of this was well intended, but that's not the process, and I can't just accept the fact that just because the applicant had agreed to it, it's completely legitimate. I think it hobbles our ability, the staff's ability to make a determination. So I think my question, though, is the applicant just mentioned at the microphone that it was well known in the community, or at least in different conversations, the location was sort of refined, established, targeted. Was the staff able to determine that in its review? So we don't have an amended application that probably would have clarified that, but it sounds like maybe there were other conversations, maybe some common knowledge about the location. Was our staff able to interrogate that and determine that that was the game plan?
Thank you for that question. So again, we pressed on the community location and the location of the school, both in the capacity interview and the public hearing. And I would say in both, it was what we felt was it was not a clear determination of a location. There was conversation of Columbia, there was conversation of North Columbia, and then in the public hearing we heard that we're going to continue to listen to the community. And I think while I appreciate that then there's a cascade effect that happens, and I think what we, when we come back to what does it say within the rubric and what are we expecting, is we are looking for a targeted community such that we can then suss out demographics of that community, facility, schools, what are the needs of that community, in order to then determine the validity of the application. And while I very much understand that the intent of the applicant is to serve all students in the school district, that's the option of a public charter school, there's also the reality that wherever that school intends to locate is going to be the center of its overall student enrollment.
Just one final follow-up question. Thank you. That's very helpful, and I think it again goes to the point that following the process is key, because that would have been able to clarify this location issue. My last question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure I understand clearly. This county is big, it's diverse, it's got a lot of people in it. Are we saying that, to check the box on the rubric to meet or exceed it, we have to identify a quote community? Your determination was identifying the community as the county as a whole was insufficient to meet that. Is that correct?
That's correct, because particularly in Murray County, as it is in other counties, there are multiple population centers. And so are they planning to be in northern Murray County, which is more closer to the Spring Hill area in Williamson County? Are you planning to be more in the Columbia area, which is more central Murray County? And those are simply different populations. You have a higher African-American population in Columbia. You have a higher white population in the Spring Hill area. And so those are there's also a lot of rural areas in Murray County. And so really deeply understanding what it is, and then where they plan to locate, but then also the facility. And I think that's what we're seeing, not to deviate, but let's think of like of Rutherford County as an example. There are, depending on where you are in Rutherford County, the facilities options look very different. And therefore, then that's going to lead into, do you have a plan to meet whatever the facility challenges are, depending on where you're going to be? And certainly, again, we're not asking for, we're going to be at 500 James Robertson Parkway, but it is, we're going to be serving the, this general area. Here are the zoned schools that are in this general area. Here are their academic performance. Here are the demographics, because that then allows us to ask much more targeted questions to determine the academic plan's viability.
Commissioner Eddy.
Thank you. And again, following with what my fellow commissioner said, I think I don't get the sense here that there were any games being played. I think there was good faith effort on both parts that caused a mess, and that's why everybody needs to stick to the process that's laid out to avoid these confusions. Because and I apologize, is it Shellhammer? Okay. As Mr. Shellhammer pointed out, it was well known within this, and this. But it's not well known because all we can review is what's on the record. We can't take all that other maybe common knowledge and pull it in. We can only review what's before us. It's not common knowledge in what's before us. So with that, and then the statement that they're willing to delay for 2 years, my recommendation would be is it's not ready. We need to go back. You've got time to bring it forward next year to open in the August of 2025. As I look at it, the academic plan as our own review committee, it's not ready. The operations plan, not ready. That gives you time to find that school leader to really refine this process, because we can't approve on conditions. And I see, Mayor Sheila Butt sitting here. My recommendation for you is just to go back and help communicate this to Maury County school system. Make sure they're following the process. Again, I think in everybody, in what I'm getting the sense here is everybody was trying to work together collaboratively, and sometimes that can just really cause a gunk in the junk. The whole system will start shutting down, and that's what we had in this process. So, just please communicate that we need everybody to follow the process. I think that, again, just where it is right now, with what we can look at, I'm not comfortable saying approve today, knowing that you are even willing to wait till 2025. I think you've got time to bring this back. I also want to make sure and caution you not to look at this as a cookie cutter approach. Really tailor what you're looking at for the community. Every child in every community is going to be different. Don't just assume because it happened in one place, it's going to happen in another. Really refine in, and I think you would have a very strong case in the future. But right this minute, I can't vote to overturn our executive director's recommendation just based on everything that's been laid out here today.
With respect to the leadership question, my question for you, Tess, is because the sponsor has, I know they're new to the state, but they have a lot of other schools seemingly well known. Did that not, they don't have a leader, so they can't ask these sort of they can't answer these detailed granular questions that would allow them to satisfy the parts of the rubric about academics and operations. But was the staff able, and maybe this is an improper consideration, but would we then be able to look at past performance, what they do in other schools, how they've answered those questions in Jackson, how they answered them in Rutherford? Is that an adequate substitute to cross the bar in the rubric? And my understanding is the answer is no. We can't just. It's not the transitive property. It's you needed a leader that was identified to be able to answer the specific questions required of the rubric, and we can't just transitive property over it from what they're doing nationally or in other schools in the state.
Thank you. So the answer is yes. We have to consider, while we combined capacity interviews from efficiency standpoint, we also had very specific questions for the school leader identified in Jackson Madison. And then, obviously there was no school leader identified for Murray, so we was unable to probe in that same area. So I also think it's important to come back to that the proposed model leaves significant amount of autonomy and decision-making power at the school leader level, including, as an example, they list a significant number of assessments within their application as here are the possible assessments that we're going to use. And when we said, well, who chooses what assessments are going to be used and how those are used to drive student data, the answer is, well, the school leader will choose. So an option, if you don't want to identify a school leader because you haven't been approved, is to say, here are the 3 assessments we're using. Here's why. Here's how they're going to be across every single school we use. I'm not faulting them for that decision. That's an intentional decision that they're making to keep their network staff out of day-to-day school operations. That, they were very clear. The network staff does not do school supports. So when it comes to oversight of the academic plan, oversight of special populations, oversight of the operations plan, it really does come back to that school leader. So I think if we were to see this application again and we were to see, an unidentified school leader, then I would want to see, okay, then how is the governing board stepping in and making some of these decisions? Or how is the network staff without a school leader? And so it's, to a certain extent, it's one or the other. And I think when we're looking at an application, we're really assessing, does the governing board have the ability to execute the proposed plan? And do the identified staff members they have on staff, can they operate the proposed plan? And within the current model that they have described, this model hinges on the right person as the school leader.
Yes, Commissioner Woodson.
Thank you. And I'm struggling a little bit with what's the process conversation and what's relevant for this application. They are related, though. I think that's Chris's point. So if I might press on this a little bit, we had this in a previous appeal where two different things we've had. We've had where there was additional information that we didn't actually have access to. You were put in a position to make a decision based on limited information. There was more timely information, and we've, I think, productively struggled with how we're going to address that on a unique model that I would say almost uniformly, but not totally uniformly, public charters typically have more autonomy at the principal level. That's typical. If we are going, I think we should be as precise as possible to be with our applicants on what is going to meet the bar for meets or exceeds. I think that's the point that's being made here. Like, if you don't have a principal hired, because it's very difficult to have already hired a principal 2 years out, it's clearly a plus because we know who the leader is. We know what their experience is. I think from the previous application, that was the 5-star that you see. You're able to explore special populations, academic curriculum, academic plan, facilities, their experience and operations. I think from a process perspective, though, the more we can, and again, we've actually not existed that long, so we're getting clearer every year. The more we can be clear for folks on what will meet our standard. And I think you've given all of those outlines today. Okay, then what will the academic model be specifically? Not a multiple choice of options, but what will be true that we can count on to make the decision. That process aspect feels very important. It's certainly a significant distinction in the same model between two applicants. And so I just appreciate that, but I'd love for us at the appropriate time to think about that from a process perspective so that we can be as clear as possible for folks on our end of the process. So I appreciate that very much.
Just one follow-up question. So just to make sure I understand, a leader does not have to be identified to satisfy the rubric, but in this case, because the way their model is structured, a leader is given tremendous autonomy and in order to satisfy the rubric, there are certain detailed, granular questions that have to be answered. So you don't necessarily need a leader, but you have to have these questions answered. This model effectively to answer those questions requires a leader. And my question is, we were not able to otherwise get those answers from the network, other leadership staff, et cetera, in the absence of them having selected a principal.
Yes, and I think that is because when we pressed in the capacity interview about will the network staff that they have on staff, will they be responsible for any day-to-day school level operations? And the answer is no. Now, if their model were, yes, our director of schools is in charge of the instructional, the academic model across all of our 3 schools. Here's what all of our 3 schools assessment program will look like. I mean, that's a different conversation. And so I think when we think about what are we assessing, we're not just assessing what's written on paper. It's financial plan and capacity. And in this case, there were places where we were not able to fill in the gaps because of the model and how they've structured it and what their governing board will do and won't do. That is just, it was different. It was difficult for us to assess. And I think when we walked out of both public hearings, when we worked out of the capacity interviews, to me it was clear. We've spent more time in Jackson-Madison and Maury County. We're just not there yet. That doesn't mean they can't get there. And I agree. I mean, I think throughout the record, there was clear, the vote in Maury County was 6-5. I think there was clear, and even the email documentation we were reviewing, I do think that there was hey, let's not burden you with this amended application. Why don't we'll just do this written responses. We'll all figure it out. And then it all fell apart. And so then when we get to the appeal process, it then makes it challenging, honestly, for all parties. And I think that was clear in the public hearing. That was clear in our appellate process. And so my strong suggestion would be there's a reason for there to be an amended application. And although it's more work for everyone, we are now seeing why that is a key part of this process.
Madam Chair.
Griscom.
Yes, thank you. That's the point that needs to be made. There is a process, and it's laid out so you can have a fair evaluation. And I appreciate the fact that the sponsor wanted to sort of cooperate and go along with all this. I would not have done that. I've said, thanks for asking, but there is a process we need to follow. And we're going to put it in, because we might be looking at something different. If that had been submitted, rather than answering just questions, they could have answered the questions. But we had that additional piece of information where they had done the appeal the way it's set out. Then it might be closer to what was referenced before about RCP. Because RCP was about trying to go around, trying to avoid, trying not to cooperate. And so I hope that's also one of the lessons, not just for this sponsor, but for others, is there is a way to evaluate this. And you've laid it out, and hopefully people realize that. And it may be convenient, and the school system may say, let's do it this way. You got to say, I appreciate that, but we have to follow the way it is laid out for this process to work. We might be looking at something very different.
Commissioner Levine.
I think at this point, I just would make a motion to affirm the recommendation of our executive director.
Okay, I just have one comment. From watching this, there are 3 things. First of all, my favorite topic, which is curriculum. This application failed to say anything about how it would meet Tennessee standards. And in fact, even if you looked at the public hearing, the basic idea was this was approved in Rutherford County, so you guys should be. We application. Quite frankly, money or it's on, even if we've approved it before with respect to another school being operated by this sponsor, it is this sponsor's obligation with respect to this application to meet the requirements. Also feel that way about the identification of the location. At the public hearing on this, there were 3 subjects talked about, up near Spring Hill, the northern part of, it's not Covington, Columbia and Columbia. And in order to make the assessment, we have to look at that community and look at the schools in that community and see if there is a. We're not just approving charters to be approving charters. We're approving charters that will provide quality options to kids and communities and doing what have an understanding of what. Lastly, on the school leadership, there could have been guidance given as to where this school was headed, even without a school leader, as to what the expectations would be as to how your standards would be applied. And there just wasn't anything given. It was sort of like, well, once we have a leader, we'll be able to tell you all that. And I just think this whole thing's. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. We have a motion. We have a second. Are there any other comments? Hayden, would you call the roll, please? And the motion is to adopt the resolution to uphold the denial of American Classical Academy Murray's amended application, although there really wasn't one.
Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Levine.
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Patterson.
Yes.
Commissioner Eddie Smith.
Yes.
Commissioner Lauren Smith. Commissioner Tudor.
Yes.
Commissioner Woodson. Commissioner Griscom.
Yes.
Chair Richards.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 9 ayes.
Okay, the commission has determined that we will adopt a resolution to uphold the denial of American Classical Academy Murray's amended application. All right, I want to thank you all for your attendance and participation in this meeting of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. I want to thank both commissioners and staff for putting a lot of time and effort into getting us prepared for all the appeals the commission has received this year. I particularly want to thank those of you in the audience who traveled here to show support for your position. We appreciate the fact that you care enough about the kids in your community to be here and speaking on their behalf, because they don't have a voice. You have to speak for them, so thank you. Tomorrow we will reconvene at 9 a.m. Central to vote on the 6 remaining charter school appeals before we conclude our meeting. At this time, I will entertain a motion to recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow a.m.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Just a quick announcement. Tomorrow